What's the wildest thing your ex ever did after the breakup? I thought my ex Priscilla was coping with our breakup. I thought I'd seen it all when it came to breakups. But what would you do if your ex, who you thought was on another continent, suddenly showed up at your door at 8 a.m., buzzing relentlessly, completely unannounced with all her luggage? Because that's exactly what happened to me. It was a Saturday morning, a pounding headache, and a new girl asleep in my bed. And what unfolded next wasn't just insane. It was a terrifying, mind-bending invasion that completely shattered my world. Story begins, Priscilla and I had been together for 3 years. When we broke up, it wasn't some huge, messy fight. We just drifted apart. She told me she was moving to Japan for a teaching job, and I genuinely thought that was it. She posted photos of her farewell party, talked about how her mental health was finally stable, and I really, truly wished her well. I wanted to believe in that kind of clean, mature ending. Then came that Saturday morning, about 6 months later. I'd been out with my buddies the night before, completely destroyed myself at a new bar downtown. My head was throbbing, a jackhammer behind my eyes. Macy, the girl I'd been seeing for a few weeks, was still asleep next to me, thankfully oblivious. And then the buzzer for my apartment started going off. Not a polite little tap, but someone holding it down, relentlessly, like they were trying to drill through the intercom. At 8 a.m., my entire body tensed. I stumbled out of bed in my boxers, cursing under my breath, ready to yell at whatever delivery guy thought this was acceptable. The buzzing wouldn't stop. I hit the intercom button, took a deep breath, prepared to unleash hell, and then Priscilla's voice came through the speaker. My ex-girlfriend, the one who was supposed to be teaching English in Japan. She was talking fast, a frantic, almost breathless stream of words, saying she needed to come up right away. Macy stirred, woke up, and asked sleepily, "Who's that?" My heart leapt into my throat. Just a package," I mumbled, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. But Priscilla wasn't giving up. She started yelling through the intercom, loud enough that I could hear it, even through the door, saying she could see my light was on. Other tenants were probably getting annoyed, she insisted. The sheer audacity of it. I pressed the button again. "Priscilla, this isn't a good time." I was trying to keep my voice calm, but panic was starting to bubble. That's when she hit me with it. She was standing there, she said, with all her luggage, straight from the airport. Her flight had just landed. She'd taken an Uber directly to my apartment, hadn't even stopped at a hotel. My blood ran cold. Against every single instinct, against all logic, against the overwhelming desire to just pretend she wasn't real, I buzzed her in. I threw on some clothes, my hands shaking uncontrollably, while Macy, now fully awake and looking terrified, kept asking what was going on. I just told her to stay in bed, praying she wouldn't come out. A minute later, Priscilla was at my door, dragging 2 massive suitcases behind her. She smiled a wide, almost manic grin, like showing up unannounced from a different continent was totally normal. She started rambling about how teaching abroad had made her realize what really mattered, how she'd thought about me every single day, how we were meant to be together. I tried to explain, tried to tell her she couldn't just show up like this, that we'd broken up for good reasons, that I'd moved on, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on me, yet completely unfocused. She pushed past me with her suitcase, and then she saw it, Macy's purse on my kitchen counter. Her face changed completely. The smile vanished, replaced by something cold, almost predatory. She started walking through my apartment, like she still lived there, like she owned the place. She saw Macy's shoes by the door, a wine glass with lipstick marks. She opened my bathroom and found Macy's makeup bag. My stomach was in knots. That's when Macy, bless her heart, came out of the bedroom. She was wearing my old college t-shirt, looking utterly bewildered and scared. The 3 of us stood there, frozen. My hangover was hitting peak levels, warring with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Priscilla looked between us, that bizarre, manic smile creeping back onto her face. Then she clapped her hands together. "So," she asked with a chilling, unsettling seriousness, "can I join the party?" Macy grabbed her clothes and was gone within 10 minutes. I didn't blame her for a second. Priscilla, meanwhile, just sat on my couch like she'd won something. She started unpacking her suitcase, pulling out gifts she'd bought me in Japan. A silk robe, expensive chopsticks, a photo album of places she wanted us to visit together. The sheer delusion of it all was overwhelming. I told her she needed to leave. Now, she just laughed, said I was just surprised, that I'd feel differently once the shock wore off. She wouldn't go. Every time I asked her, she'd change the subject. She started making breakfast in my kitchen. She even called her mom, announcing loudly that she'd arrived safely at our apartment. I was desperate. I called her sister, someone I'd actually stayed friendly with after the breakup. Priscilla's sister was horrified. She told me Priscilla had been telling everyone back home that she was coming back because we'd reconciled, that we'd been planning this for months. None of it was true. We hadn't spoken since she left. Her sister flew in the very next day. What we found out was heartbreaking and terrifying. Priscilla had stopped taking her medication 3 months into her teaching job. She'd been living in an alternate reality where we were still together, interpreting my silence, my complete lack of contact, as some kind of romantic, long-distance understanding. The isolation in Japan had triggered a full-blown manic episode that had lasted for months. The intervention was brutal. Priscilla screamed, absolutely shrieked, that everyone was trying to keep us apart. She'd spent her entire savings on the flight on those gifts. She'd quit her teaching job, told her landlord in Japan she wasn't coming back. She'd burned her entire life down for a relationship that existed only in her head. Her family got her into treatment. Bipolar with psychotic features, they said. I felt guilty for a long, long time. Wondered if I should have checked in on her more, if I could have done anything to prevent this. But her sister was firm. None of this was my fault. Priscilla had done similar things before we even met. Macy never spoke to me again, and I don't blame her. Walking into that situation, that would scare anyone off. A year later, Priscilla sent me a letter through her therapist, a real apology. She was stable on medication, living with her parents, working part-time at a bookstore. She said she finally understood how terrifying that morning must have been for me. I wrote back, wished her well, and I truly meant it. It was a huge relief, honestly. My life went on. I met someone incredible at a friend's wedding. On our 3rd date, I found myself telling her the Japan story, and she just laughed. So hard. She actually snorted her drink. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and said, "So, you're telling me a woman flew 15 hours, showed up at your door with suitcases, found another woman in your bed, and asked to join?" I just nodded. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." She shook her head, still chuckling. "At least your exes are interesting. Mine just unfollowed me on Instagram." That's when I knew. This woman, she was the one. The very next morning, we met at this little coffee shop near her place. She walked in, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair still damp from the shower, a huge smile on her face. Before I even finished ordering my coffee, she brought up the Japan story again. She wanted every single detail I'd left out the night before. What Priscilla's suitcases looked like. The exact silk robe she'd brought me. How long Macy took to get dressed and leave. She was laughing so hard. Tears were running down her face, and she kept wiping them away with her napkin. The barista probably thought we were absolutely crazy. I found myself telling her everything. How I spent months after that looking over my shoulder every time I walked to my car. How I'd check my apartment building entrance before going inside. How I changed my route to work for a while because Priscilla knew my usual coffee stop. How I'd blocked her on everything, but still felt like she might just show up anywhere. My wife, my then girlfriend, listened to all of it without interrupting once. She stirred her coffee and nodded, just taking it all in. Then she said something that completely caught me off guard. She told me she thought I'd handled the whole thing with a lot of compassion, considering how scary it must have been. Most guys, she said, would have called the cops immediately or been cruel about it. But I'd actually tried to help get Priscilla into treatment. That observation stuck with me for days after. It was like she saw something in me I hadn't even realized was there. We started seeing each other more seriously after that conversation. Not just dates here and there, but actual plans. She'd come over to my place, and we'd cook dinner together. I'd meet her after work, and we'd just walk around the city, talking for hours. We texted constantly throughout the day, random stuff, nothing deep, just checking in. I realized I'd never felt this comfortable being completely honest with someone before. She asked about my past relationships without any judgment in her voice, just genuine curiosity. She shared her own messy dating stories, too. Her ex who'd ghosted her after 2 years. The guy who turned out to be married. The one who broke up with her over text while she was at her grandmother's funeral. We'd sit on her couch and laugh about how absurd dating in your 20s was. How everyone was just stumbling around trying to figure out what they wanted. How we'd both dated people who were completely wrong for us because we didn't know any better yet. About 3 months in, my friend Aaron invited us to a party at his place. I was nervous about her meeting my friends, not because I thought they wouldn't like her, but because my friend group had witnessed the whole Priscilla situation. They'd seen me at my worst, the complete wreck I was for months. But my girlfriend walked into Aaron's apartment like she'd known everyone for years. She asked questions, laughed at their jokes, fit right into conversations. Aaron pulled me aside in the kitchen while she was talking to some other people. He handed me a beer and said, "Dude, this is the first time since the Priscilla thing that I've seen you genuinely relaxed around someone. You look happy. Actually happy, not just going through the motions." I watched her across the room, telling some story with her hands, making everyone around her laugh. Aaron was right. I felt different with her. Lighter somehow. A few weeks later, she called me from a work conference in Chicago. She sounded weird on the phone. Not upset, just surprised. She'd met Priscilla's sister, completely by accident. They'd both been at the same session about marketing strategies or something. They'd gotten coffee together during a break. My stomach dropped when she first told me. But then she explained that Priscilla's sister had mentioned how grateful their whole family still was, that I'd been kind during the intervention, that I could have made everything so much worse, but I hadn't. My girlfriend said Priscilla's sister seemed really genuine about it. She also mentioned that Priscilla was doing better, still living with her parents, but working steadily at the bookstore, taking her medication, seeing a therapist regularly. Apparently, she'd even started dating someone new. Hearing all that gave me this strange sense of relief I hadn't expected to feel. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying just lifted. 6 months into dating, I woke up one random Tuesday morning and just knew. I wanted to marry her. It wasn't some big romantic moment. We were in my apartment and she was making breakfast. She had her hair tied up in this messy bun. She was wearing my old shirt and her pajama pants. She was humming along to some song on the radio. I was just sitting at the kitchen table, watching her crack eggs into a bowl. The way she'd handled hearing about Priscilla, the way she laughed at everything life threw at her, the way she made me feel safe being exactly who I was. It all clicked into place right there while she was whisking eggs. This was the person I wanted to build a life with. This was what a real partnership felt like. Not drama or chaos or walking on eggshells. Just this easy, comfortable certainty that we were right together. I started looking at engagement rings. The next week, I went to 3 different jewelry stores trying to find something that felt like her. Not too flashy, but still special. I met up with my friend Ryland for drinks and asked his advice about proposals. He suggested keeping it simple and personal rather than some elaborate public thing. He knew my style after everything I'd been through. He said I should do something that felt authentic to us, not what I thought proposals were supposed to look like. That made sense. She wasn't the type who wanted a flash mob or a restaurant full of strangers watching. She'd want something real and meaningful, just between us. 2 weeks later, we took a weekend trip to the mountains. We hiked up to this lookout point that gave us a view of the whole valley below. We sat on a rock, eating sandwiches we'd packed. She asked me if I ever worried about running into Priscilla around town. I told her honestly that I used to. For months, I'd tense up every time I saw someone with similar hair or build. But I didn't anymore. I'd moved on completely. Whatever happened with Priscilla was part of my past now, not something that controlled my present. My wife-to-be nodded and squeezed my hand. She said she was glad that everyone deserved to move forward from hard things. That night at the cabin we rented, we ended up talking until 3 o'clock in the morning about what we wanted in marriage. Money stuff first, how we'd handle joint accounts and individual spending, whether we'd combine everything or keep some things separate. Then kids, how many we wanted, when we might want to start trying, what kind of parents we hope to be, how we'd handle disagreements about parenting. Then the harder stuff, how we'd deal with conflict when it came up, whether we'd go to bed angry or always resolve things first. My girlfriend brought up mental health without any hesitation. She told me about her own struggles with anxiety, how she managed it with therapy and sometimes medication, how important it was to her that we could be open about that stuff. I appreciated her honesty more than she probably knew. After Priscilla, the idea of someone being that upfront about their mental health felt like a gift. I proposed 2 weeks after we got back from the mountains. No elaborate setup, just us in our apartment on a Wednesday night. We'd ordered takeout and were sitting on the couch. I pulled the ring box out of my jacket pocket. I started to say something about how much she meant to me, how she changed my life. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. She was crying and laughing at the same time. She kept looking at the ring, then at me, then back at the ring. We spent the rest of the night calling our families. Her mom screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. My dad got quiet for a second and then said he was really happy for us. My mom cried. Everyone wanted to know when the wedding would be. We had no idea yet. We were just happy to be engaged, to know this was really happening, that we were building this life together. My mom grabbed my arm at the engagement party and pulled me toward the kitchen. She had this look on her face I hadn't seen in years, pure relief mixed with happiness. She told me she could see the difference in how I carried myself now, how I smiled more easily, how I didn't have that tension in my shoulders anymore. She said, "Watching you with your fiancé reminded me of why people got married in the first place. Not because they needed someone to complete them, but because they found someone who made life better just by being there." She hugged me hard and whispered that she'd been so worried after everything with Priscilla, that she'd wondered if I'd ever trust anyone again. But seeing me now, she knew I'd found exactly what I needed. My dad shook my hand later that night and told me he approved. Coming from him, that meant everything. My phone buzzed 3 days after we posted engagement photos online. Carlos's name popped up on the screen. I hadn't talked to him in months. He sent a long message congratulating me and saying the photos looked great. Then he mentioned something that made me stop scrolling. He'd run into Priscilla at the bookstore where she worked. They'd talked for a few minutes. She asked how I was doing. When Carlos mentioned my name had come up in conversation with mutual friends, she'd smiled and said she was genuinely happy for me, that she hoped I'd found someone good. Carlos said she seemed stable, clear-eyed, like she was actually living in reality now instead of whatever alternate universe she'd been in before. He said he wanted me to know, just in case it mattered. It did matter, not because I needed Priscilla's approval or blessing, but because knowing she was okay lifted something I didn't realize I'd been carrying. My fiancé brought up Priscilla's sister a week later while we were looking at wedding invitation designs. She said we should invite her to the wedding. I looked up from the cardstock samples we'd been sorting through. My fiancé explained her thinking. Priscilla's sister had helped so much during that nightmare. She dropped everything to fly in and deal with the intervention. She'd kept me updated on Priscilla's treatment. She'd been a good friend when I needed one. My fiancé was right. That whole family had gone through hell, too. Priscilla's sister had apologized to me multiple times for things that weren't her fault. She'd thanked me for being kind during the crisis when I could have just called the cops and washed my hands of the situation. I agreed we should invite her. It felt like the right thing to do. Wedding planning turned into this whole thing that took over our lives. My fiancé signed us up for dance classes, so we wouldn't look stupid during our first dance. We showed up at the studio downtown on a Thursday night. About 6 other couples were already there practicing basic steps. The instructor started teaching us a simple waltz. My fiancé kept stepping on my feet and laughing about it. Halfway through the lesson, she leaned in close and whispered, "At least no ex-girlfriends are going to crash through the door with suitcases this time." I started laughing so hard I had to stop dancing. The instructor gave us a look. My fiancé just grinned, and we kept going. That moment hit me hard. I could finally laugh about what happened. The whole Priscilla situation didn't control me anymore. It was just this wild story from my past, not something that defined my present. We spent 3 months looking at wedding venues. My fiancé had specific ideas about what she wanted. Nothing too formal or stuffy. No giant ballrooms or hotel conference rooms. She wanted something that felt like us, intimate and relaxed. We looked at restaurants and art galleries and even a brewery. Nothing felt quite right. Then we found this small garden space tucked behind an old house that had been converted into an event venue. Trees everywhere, string lights hanging between the branches, a little patio area for the ceremony, and a covered space for dinner if it rained. My fiancé walked around the garden twice, and then turned to me with this huge smile. This was it. The venue manager showed us photos of past weddings held there. Everything looked comfortable and unpretentious, exactly what we wanted. We booked it that same day. My friend Mia offered to help my fiancé with wedding dress shopping. I'd introduced them a few weeks earlier at a dinner party, and they'd hit it off immediately. My fiancé told me later that she'd never had a sister, and Mia felt like the closest thing. They spent an entire Saturday going to bridal shops. My fiancé tried on probably 20 dresses. Mia took photos of each one, and they debated the pros and cons. When my fiancé finally found the one she wanted, Mia cried. Actually cried right there in the store. My fiancé told me about it that night while we were getting ready for bed. She said Mia had pulled her aside and told her she'd never seen me this content with someone, that I seemed like a completely different person than the guy who'd been dealing with the Priscilla chaos. My fiancé asked if that was true. I told her it absolutely was. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number 2 months before the wedding. The message was short and polite. It was Priscilla asking if she could send a card to congratulate me. She said she'd seen the engagement announcement through mutual friends. She understood if I preferred she didn't reach out. She just wanted to wish me well if that was okay. I stared at the message for a solid minute. Then I showed it to my fiancé. She read it twice and handed my phone back. She said it was completely my decision, but she wasn't threatened by it. She trusted me to handle it however felt right. I appreciated that more than I could explain. No jealousy or weirdness, just trust. I responded to Priscilla the next day, kept it brief and friendly, but boundaried. Thanked her for reaching out, told her a card would be fine, and I appreciated the kind gesture. I didn't ask how she was doing or try to start a conversation. Just acknowledged her message and left it at that. She texted back within an hour. A simple message wishing me happiness and saying she was glad I'd found someone. That was it. No attempts to keep talking, no reminiscing about the past. Just a clean, appropriate exchange between 2 people who used to date and were now living completely separate lives. Exactly how it should be. Aaron organized my bachelor party the week before the wedding. Nothing crazy. He made reservations at a nice restaurant and invited my closest friends. We had dinner and played some card games back at his place, drank beer, and told stupid stories from college. Ryland brought up the Priscilla situation at one point, said he remembered how stressed out I'd been for months after it happened, how I'd jumped every time my phone rang. Carlos mentioned he'd been worried I was going to swear off dating entirely. Aaron laughed and said he'd never seen someone look as relieved as I did the first time I introduced them to my now wife. They all agreed I seemed different now, settled, happy, not walking around waiting for the next disaster to strike. I realized they were right. I'd spent my 20s lurching from one crisis to another. Now I was just living my life with someone I loved. It felt good. My fiancée had her bachelorette party that same weekend. Her friends took her to a spa and then out to dinner. Nothing wild or over the top, just a nice day together. We met up afterward at our apartment. She was glowing, told me about the massage she got and the ridiculous amount of wine they drank at dinner. Then she sat down next to me on the couch and said something that made me smile. She said she was ready to just be married already. All the planning and organizing and decision-making was fine, but she was done with it. The wedding felt like a formality for a commitment we'd already made to each other. I felt exactly the same way. We'd been living like a married couple for months. The ceremony was just making it official for everyone else. 2 days before the wedding, a card arrived in the mail with Priscilla's sister's handwriting on the envelope. I opened it at the kitchen table while my fiancée finished packing her work bag. The card was beautiful, one of those expensive ones with pressed flowers on thick paper. Inside, her sister wrote that she couldn't make it to the wedding, but she was genuinely happy for me. She included a separate note, folded in half. I unfolded it and read that Priscilla was doing well, still stable on her medication, still working at the bookstore. She'd been in a relationship for several months, now with someone she met through a support group. The note said, Priscilla wanted me to know she was truly happy for me and wished me the best. My fiancée looked over my shoulder and read the card. She squeezed my hand and said, "That was really nice of them to reach out." I folded the note back up and put it in my desk drawer. It felt like the final piece of closure I didn't know I needed. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, just warm enough for an outdoor ceremony. I stood at the front of the garden venue, watching guests arrive and take their seats. My hands were sweating, but I wasn't nervous about marrying her, just nervous about being the center of attention for a whole day. Aaron stood next to me as my best man, adjusting his tie every few minutes. He leaned over and asked if I was ready. I nodded and told him I'd been ready for months. The music started and everyone stood up. My wife appeared at the end of the aisle in a simple white dress, carrying flowers from the farmer's market we went to every Sunday. She was smiling so big I could see it from 50 feet away. Her dad walked her down the aisle and shook my hand before sitting down. The officiant started talking, but I barely heard the words. I just looked at my wife standing there, holding my hands. She was real, and she was mine, and this was actually happening. During the vows, I looked out at our families sitting together. My mom was already crying. Her parents were holding hands. Everyone we cared about was there, watching us promise to build a life together. The officiant asked if I took her to be my wife. I said I did without hesitation. She said the same when it was her turn. We exchanged rings and kissed while everyone clapped. Walking back down the aisle as a married couple felt surreal, like I'd crossed some invisible line into a completely different life. The reception started an hour later in the same garden space. Tables were set up under string lights. Food was laid out buffet style, and a small dance floor had been set up near the trees. Everyone ate and talked and laughed. The sun started setting, and the lights came on overhead. Ryland stood up to give his speech with a glass of champagne in his hand. He tapped the glass until everyone got quiet. He talked about how he'd known me since college, through all my messy relationships and bad decisions. He mentioned the Priscilla situation without going into detail, just said he watched me go through something really hard. Then he said he'd never seen me as happy and settled as I'd been since meeting my wife. He raised his glass and said he was glad I found someone who brought out the best in me. Several people were crying by the end, including my wife, who was wiping her eyes with her napkin. I stood up and hugged Ryland before sitting back down. My wife grabbed my hand under the table and squeezed it hard. The DJ announced our first dance, and we walked onto the floor while everyone watched. The song started playing, something we'd picked together that meant something to both of us. My wife put her arms around my neck, and we swayed slowly. She leaned in close and whispered that she was so happy we found each other. I told her about that moment on our third date when she laughed at the Japan story when she snorted her drink and didn't even care. That's when I knew she was different from anyone else I'd ever dated. She smiled and said she knew that night, too. We kept dancing while people took photos and videos. When the song ended, everyone clapped, and other couples joined us on the dance floor. During a break in the music, my mom cornered my wife near the dessert table. I watched from across the room as my mom talked, and my wife listened carefully. Later, my wife told me what my mom had said, that the whole family had been worried about me for a long time after Priscilla's episode, that I'd seemed lost and unsure of everything. My mom said seeing me this happy and stable meant everything to them. She told my wife she was grateful I'd found someone who understood me. My wife hugged my mom, and they both cried a little. The reception wound down around midnight. We said goodbye to everyone and got into the car Aaron had decorated with streamers and cans. We drove to a hotel near the airport because our flight to Portugal left early the next morning. We left for our honeymoon exhausted but happy, boarding a plane to Lisbon while the sun came up. My wife slept most of the flight with her head on my shoulder. We landed in Portugal 14 hours later and took a taxi to our hotel in the old part of the city. The hotel was small and charming, with blue tile everywhere and a view of the river from our window. We spent 2 weeks exploring Lisbon and the coast, eating seafood and drinking wine and walking until our feet hurt. My wife joked one night over dinner that at least here we knew no one could show up at our door with suitcases from Japan. I laughed and said that was the benefit of being thousands of miles from home. On the honeymoon, we talked about our future between visiting museums and sitting at cafes, where we wanted to live long-term, whether we wanted to stay in the city or move somewhere quieter, when we might want kids, how many, what kind of parents we wanted to be, what our life together looked like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Everything felt possible and exciting rather than scary. We talked about career goals and travel plans and whether we'd get a dog or a cat first. The conversations flowed easily without pressure or anxiety, just two people figuring out their life together. We returned home to our apartment after 2 weeks, feeling rested and closer than ever. Real life started up again immediately with work and bills and laundry. But we settled into married life, easily falling into routines that worked for both of us. My wife suggested we get a dog one Saturday morning while we were drinking coffee. She'd been looking at shelter websites and kept showing me photos of different dogs. We spent the next few weekends visiting shelters until we found the perfect rescue mutt, a medium-sized mix with floppy ears and a tail that never stopped wagging. We named him after a street in Lisbon and brought him home. 3 months after the wedding, Carlos invited us to dinner at his apartment. We ate pasta and talked about work and life. Near the end of the night, Carlos mentioned he'd seen Priscilla again at the bookstore where she worked. He'd gone in looking for a specific book, and she'd helped him find it. She asked about me, how I was doing, if I was still with the woman I'd been dating. Carlos told her I'd gotten married. He said she smiled and told him she was genuinely happy for me, that she hoped I was doing well. My wife and I talked about the update that night while getting ready for bed. She said she hoped Priscilla continued doing well, that it sounded like she was in a much better place now. There was no jealousy or weirdness in her voice, just genuine compassion for someone who went through a mental health crisis. I appreciated that about my wife more than I could explain. She never saw Priscilla as a threat or competition, just another person trying to get through life. Our first anniversary came up on a Thursday. We made reservations at the same place where we'd had that third date, the one where I told her about Priscilla showing up from Japan. My wife wore the same dress she'd worn that night, which made me laugh when I picked her up from work. The restaurant had the same corner booth available, and we sat in almost the exact same spot. She brought up the Japan story before we even ordered drinks. She was laughing about how she knew that night, right when I finished telling her about Priscilla asking to join the party, that she wanted to marry me. I asked her how a story that crazy made her want to get married, and she said it was because I told it without anger or bitterness, just this honest account of something wild that happened. She said most guys would have painted their ex as a monster or themselves as a victim, but I just told her what happened. That's when she knew I was different. We ordered the same meals we'd gotten on our third date and spent dinner talking about the year we'd been married. All the small moments that added up to something bigger. The dog we rescued, the trips we took, the routines we built together, how easy it all felt compared to relationships we'd had before. 2 weeks after our anniversary dinner, my boss called me into his office. He offered me a promotion that came with more money and more responsibility. The catch was I'd need to travel about once a month for client meetings in different cities. Usually just 2 or 3 days at a time, but consistent. I told him I needed to talk to my wife before accepting. He said to take the weekend and let him know Monday. I went home that night and laid out the whole situation. The promotion meant better pay and a clear path toward the senior positions I wanted eventually, but it also meant being away from home regularly. My wife didn't hesitate. She said I should take it. We could figure out the logistics together. Over the next few days, we worked out systems for staying connected when I traveled. Morning video calls before my meetings, texting throughout the day, evening calls where we'd cook dinner together over the phone. Her in our kitchen, and me in whatever hotel I was staying at. She made me promise to bring her back something small from each city, not expensive, just something local that reminded me of her. I accepted the promotion on Monday morning. My first business trip was to Denver 3 weeks later. I was nervous about leaving, even though it was only for 2 nights. My wife packed my suitcase and put a note in the front pocket that I didn't find until I got to the hotel. It said she was proud of me and she'd see me in 48 hours. We did our video call that first morning, and it felt completely normal. I went to my meetings. She went to work. We texted about random things throughout the day. That night we had dinner together over video and talked about our dog, who was staying with her parents. The trip went smoothly, and by the time I got home, I felt less anxious about the travel schedule. We'd proven we could handle being apart for short stretches. Around the same time I got promoted, my wife's career started taking off too. She'd been working on a big project for months, and when it launched successfully, her company noticed. They promoted her to lead a whole team, which meant more responsibility and better pay for her as well. We were both climbing in our careers at the same time, which felt good, but also required us to be intentional about staying connected. We started having weekly check-ins on Sunday mornings where we'd sit with coffee and talk about the week ahead, who had what deadlines, when I'd be traveling, what big meetings she had coming up. We made sure we both felt balanced and that neither of us was sacrificing too much for work. The system worked because we were honest with each other about when things felt off. One Sunday morning during our check-in, my wife brought up kids. Not in a pressuring way, just opening the conversation about timing. We were both doing well at work. We had the dog. We'd been married over a year. She wanted to know what I was thinking about when we might want to start trying. I told her I'd been thinking about it too, that I felt ready but also terrified. She laughed and said that was exactly how she felt. We spent the rest of that morning talking about what kind of parents we wanted to be, how we'd balance work and childcare, whether we'd want 1 kid or multiple, what values mattered most to us in raising children. She made a joke about how at least our kids would have an incredible story about how their parents met and fell in love. The whole Japan incident would become family legend. We didn't decide on an exact timeline that morning, but we agreed we were both ready to start thinking seriously about it in the next year or so. Aaron called me one afternoon while I was traveling for work. He was in my city for a conference and wanted to grab dinner. We met at a steakhouse near my hotel and caught up on life. About halfway through dinner, he told me he and his girlfriend were engaged. She'd proposed to him the previous weekend during a camping trip. I congratulated him and asked about wedding plans. He said they were just starting to figure it out and asked if my wife and I would help. Over the next few months, we met with Aaron and his fiancée regularly to help them plan. My wife was great at asking the right questions about what kind of wedding they actually wanted versus what they thought they should do. Being on the other side of wedding planning made us appreciate how smoothly ours had gone. We'd kept it simple and focused on what mattered to us. And watching Aaron stress about guest lists and seating charts reminded us that we'd made the right choices. Their wedding was beautiful when it finally happened, and standing up as Aaron's best man felt full circle from when he'd been there for me. 2 years into our marriage, we started house hunting. The apartment had been perfect when it was just us and the dog, but we wanted more space, a yard for the dog to run around in, an extra bedroom for when family visited, and eventually for kids when that time came. We spent weekends driving around neighborhoods, looking at houses that were in our budget. Most of them needed work or were in areas we didn't love. Then our realtor showed us a small place with a fenced yard and enough room to grow. It needed some updates, but nothing major. We put in an offer that same day. The process took 6 weeks from offer to closing, and moving in together felt like the next natural step in building our life. We painted the walls and set up furniture and made the place ours. The dog loved having a yard. We loved having space to spread out. The first holiday season in the new house, we decided to host both our families. My parents, her parents, a few siblings, and some cousins all came over for dinner. My wife cooked most of the meal with help from our moms, and I handled setting up the dining room to fit everyone. The gathering went smoothly. Both families had met before the wedding, but this felt different, more relaxed and natural. People mixing together without the formality of a wedding reception. After dinner, my dad pulled me aside while we were cleaning up in the kitchen. He told me he was proud of the life I'd built and the person I'd become. That watching me with my wife and seeing the home we'd created together meant everything to him. I thanked him and felt genuinely grateful for how far I'd come from that morning when Priscilla showed up at my apartment. 6 months after we moved into the house, my wife came home from work with news about a big opportunity. Her company wanted her to lead the opening of a new office in a different city, about 3 hours away. It was a promotion with significantly better pay and the chance to build something from the ground up, but it meant relocating. We spent that whole evening talking through the decision, what it would mean for my job, whether I could transfer or work remotely, what it would mean for our families, moving farther away from both sets of parents, whether we were ready for that kind of change. We made lists of pros and cons, talked about what scared us and what excited us. By the end of the night, we'd decided together that the adventure was worth it. We'd move. Over the next 2 months, we planned everything. I negotiated a remote work arrangement with my company. We listed our house and found a place to rent in the new city until we could buy. We said goodbye to friends and family with promises to visit often. The move went smoother than expected. Professional movers handled the heavy lifting, and we drove to the new city with the dog in the back seat. Our rental house was smaller than what we'd sold, but it was temporary and in a good neighborhood. Within the first month, we started exploring together, finding our new favorite coffee shop and restaurants, figuring out the best hiking trails nearby. My wife started her new role and loved the challenge of building the office from scratch. I kept my same job remotely and adjusted to working from home most days. We joined a local hiking group to meet people and made friends with another couple around our age. They had a dog, too, and the 4 of us started doing weekend hikes together. Building a community in the new city took effort, but it felt good to be on an adventure together. 3 years into our marriage, on a random Tuesday morning, My wife woke me up early. She was holding something in her hand and smiling in this way that made my heart speed up. She showed me the pregnancy test. Positive. We were both thrilled and terrified at the same time, mostly excited. We spent that morning talking about everything that would change. When we'd need to tell our families when she should schedule her first doctor appointment, how we'd prepare the spare bedroom as a nursery, what kind of parents we wanted to be. All the conversations we'd been having hypothetically were suddenly very real. We called our parents later that day, and everyone cried happy tears. My wife's mom immediately started planning to come stay with us after the baby was born. My mom started buying baby clothes. We were starting the next chapter together, and it felt right. My wife signed us up for a childbirth class at the community center when she hit her second trimester. We showed up on a Tuesday evening to a room full of other pregnant couples sitting on yoga mats. The instructor had us go around introducing ourselves and sharing how we met. Most couples had normal stories about dating apps or mutual friends. When it was our turn, my wife grinned at me with this look that meant trouble. She told the whole class about how I'd shared the Japan story on our third date, how my ex-girlfriend had flown back from teaching abroad and showed up at my apartment unannounced, how she'd asked to join when she found another woman there. The room went silent for a second. Then everyone started laughing. One guy said his worst dating story was getting ghosted after 2 dates. My wife squeezed my hand and said none of them could top our origin story. We became friends with 2 other couples from that class. They started texting us between sessions to hear more details about the Priscilla situation. By the time the class ended, we had plans for regular dinners once all our babies arrived. The delivery happened 3 weeks before my wife's due date. Her water broke at 2 o'clock in the morning while we were both asleep. We grabbed the hospital bag we'd packed weeks earlier and drove through empty streets. The whole thing took 14 hours from start to finish. My wife was incredible through all of it. I held her hand and brought her ice chips and tried not to pass out when things got intense. When our daughter finally arrived, the doctor placed her on my wife's chest, and I started crying harder than I expected. This tiny person with dark hair and my wife's nose. She opened her eyes and looked around like she was trying to figure out where she'd landed. The nurse asked if I wanted to cut the cord, and my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the scissors. We named her Ellery after my wife's grandmother. Holding her for the first time felt like every choice I'd ever made had led to this exact moment. All the chaos of my 20s, the Priscilla disaster, meeting my wife at that wedding. Everything had brought me here, to this hospital room with my daughter in my arms. The first 3 months were brutal in ways I hadn't prepared for. Ellery woke up every 2 hours needing to eat. My wife and I took shifts so we could each get some sleep. I'd walk laps around our living room at 4 in the morning with Ellery against my shoulder, bouncing and humming whatever songs came to mind. She'd finally fall asleep, and I'd try to put her in her crib. But the second her back touched the mattress, her eyes would pop open. So I'd start the whole routine again. My wife pumped milk so I could handle some of the night feedings. We developed this system where she'd prep bottles before bed and I'd warm them up when Ellery woke. We barely spoke during those early weeks, just moved around each other like zombies doing whatever needed to be done. But we were doing it together. When Ellery smiled for the first time at 6 weeks old, my wife and I both stood there staring at her like we'd witnessed a miracle. Every tiny milestone felt huge. The first time she grabbed my finger, the first time she laughed at something I did. Watching my wife with Ellery made me understand love in a completely different way. We took Ellery to visit both sets of grandparents when she hit 6 months old. My parents lost their minds over her. My dad, who I'd never seen get emotional about anything, teared up holding her. My mom had already bought enough baby clothes to last Ellery until she was 2. We spent a weekend there, and my parents fought over who got to hold her more. Then we drove to my wife's parents' place and got the same reaction. Her mom had converted their guest room into a nursery for when we visited. Her dad walked around showing Ellery off to neighbors like she was his own personal achievement. Watching my wife with Ellery during those visits did something to me. The way she'd nurse her while talking to her mom, how she'd laugh when Ellery grabbed her hair. I kept finding myself just staring at them together, feeling this overwhelming gratitude that this was my life now. Our 4th anniversary fell on a Wednesday. We couldn't go out like we used to, so we ordered takeout from our favorite restaurant and ate at home after putting Ellery to bed. My wife poured us wine, and we sat on the couch with the baby monitor between us. She brought up our 3rd date out of nowhere, how I'd told her the Japan story, and she'd known right then she wanted to marry me. I asked her what it was about that story that made her so sure. She said it wasn't the story itself, but how I told it. That I could talk about something that traumatic with humor and perspective. That I clearly had done the work to heal and move on. She said she knew I'd be a good partner because I hadn't let that experience make me bitter or closed off. We talked about everything we'd built since then, moving to the city for her job, buying our house, getting pregnant, now sitting here as parents to this perfect little person sleeping upstairs. My wife said she couldn't imagine her life any other way. I ran into Macy at the grocery store on a random Saturday morning. I was pushing a cart with Ellery in the baby seat, trying to remember what my wife had put on the shopping list. Macy was standing in the produce section, and we made eye contact before either of us could pretend we hadn't seen each other. She walked over and said hi, asked how I'd been. I gestured to Ellery and said I'd been busy with this. Macy bent down to look at her and said she was beautiful. She told me she was engaged now, getting married next spring. I congratulated her and meant it. She asked if I was married, and I showed her my ring. We stood there for a minute, making small talk about nothing important. She said she was glad things had worked out for me, that she hoped I was happy. I told her I was. She smiled and said she had to get going, and we both went back to our shopping. The whole interaction lasted maybe 3 minutes. No awkwardness. No weirdness, just 2 people who used to know each other briefly. Both moved on to completely different lives. My wife asked about my day when I got home with the groceries. I mentioned running into Macy while unpacking the bags. She looked up from where she was playing with Ellery on the floor, asked how that had gone. I told her it was fine, actually nice in a weird way, that Macy was engaged and seemed genuinely happy for me. My wife said she was glad everyone from my past seemed to have landed in good places. Priscilla stable and working at the bookstore. Macy engaged and moved on. Me here with a wife and daughter. She said she thought the Japan incident, as insane as it was, had taught me what I actually needed in a partner. Someone who could laugh at life's chaos instead of adding to it. Someone steady and real. I'd learned the difference between drama and depth, between intensity and actual intimacy. She said she thought that whole experience had prepared me to recognize what we had when we met, that I might have taken it for granted otherwise. Ellery took her first steps 2 weeks after her first birthday. My wife and I were both sitting on the living room floor with her between us. She'd been pulling herself up on furniture for weeks, cruising along the couch while holding on. This time, she let go and just stood there wobbling. My wife and I both froze. Ellery looked at us with this proud expression and took 3 shaky steps toward me before falling into my arms. My wife started crying immediately. I felt tears running down my face, too. We both sat there on the floor, holding Ellery and crying like idiots. These were the moments that actually mattered. Not the dramatic gestures or big declarations. Just this. Our daughter learning to walk in our living room on a random Tuesday evening. The 3 of us together, building this quiet, stable, beautiful life. We started planning a trip back to Portugal for our 5th anniversary. My wife wanted to return to where we'd honeymooned, but this time as a family. We looked at flights and hotels that would work with a toddler. Found a place near the beach with a kitchen so we could make Ellery's meals. My wife pulled up photos from our honeymoon, and we laughed at how much had changed since then. She said Ellery needed to hear the Japan story when she got older, that our daughter should know the wild path that led to her existence. I said we'd wait until she was old enough to appreciate the absurdity of it. My wife joked that Ellery would probably be embarrassed by us, no matter what stories we told. We booked the trip for the following summer and started counting down the months. Looking back on everything felt surreal sometimes. That Saturday morning 6 years ago when Priscilla showed up at my door with her suitcases, Macy leaving and never speaking to me again. The year of feeling guilty and confused about what I could have done differently. Then meeting my wife at that wedding, telling her the Japan story on our third date and watching her laugh until she snorted. Getting married and moving to a new city together. Ellery being born and becoming parents. All of it had led here to this moment, with my wife reading to Ellery before bed while I cleaned up the kitchen. I had found someone who loved me exactly as I was, who laughed at life's chaos with me instead of creating more of it, who built this stable, happy life alongside me one day at a time. Priscilla was healthy and living her own life. Macy was engaged and moved on. Everyone had found their way to where they needed to be. And I was here in this house with my family, grateful for every strange twist that had brought me to this exact, wonderful place. Call to action, I mean, seriously, what a journey, right? It just shows you how sometimes the most terrifying moments can lead you exactly where you're meant to be. Have you ever experienced a wild, unexpected twist in your life that, looking back, ended up being a crucial turning point? Or had someone come into your life who helped you heal and see things differently? Share your stories down in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear them.